everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're doing an interview about protecting yourself around grain dust this fall. So for this reason, we brought in Carolyn Sheridan, who's an RN and BSN, and the Executive Director and founder of the Ag Health and Safety Alliance. So we really wanted to talk about this this time of year because obviously we're going into harvest. There's a lot of grain being handled and moved and dried right now. And so every year we have hazards with breathing in some of those dusts and molds. But especially this year where we have in a lot of parts of the state some damaged grain, especially corn from the derecho windstorm. We have a lot of drought stress corn. We might be harvesting overly dry grain in some areas as well. So in those cases, we're talking about probably a little more fine material, maybe more dust and maybe more mold. So it's especially important this year to talk about this, but every year we need to be talking about protecting, our respiratory system with the proper equipment. So that's why we brought Carolyn on. So to start, before we get into questions, Carolyn, do you want to talk a little bit about what the Ag Health and Safety Alliance does?
Yes, thank you for talking about this very important topic. As you said, not only this year, but every year. Ag Health and Safety Alliance is an international nonprofit organization, and we focus on making sure that we have good resources and educational material, as well as doing educational program in agricultural health and safety. One of our primary programs really does focus on the next generation of agriculture, where we teach college students not only in the United States, but in other countries in the world. But also we're very interested in how we can teach and give education to all generations in agriculture. So this topic and many other topics are things that we discuss and educate on all times of the year.
Yeah, that's great. So this is just a subset of what you guys do, really. But
a very important subset.
Yeah. Okay, so to kind of get into some of the questions, so just to kick it off, what are some of the respiratory hazards that farmers are facing every fall, especially this fall?
Right. So you really mentioned some good ones, and we're concerned, of course, about moldy grain, which can happen more than in the fall, but we're also concerned about organic type of properties in grain bins and also in other tasks that farmers do throughout their day, because we're not just harvesting, we're also in our other buildings with our livestock, or we're performing other tasks. So respiratory wise, we know that this very fine, small particles that we breathe in can get deep down into our lungs, into our alveoli, and that can cause some long-term, permanent, chronic, debilitating lung disease. So right now, of course, we're talking about harvest types of grains and those dusts, but we really need to think about the other tasks we're doing right now and throughout the year.
Right, yeah, and so it sounds like, we have some direct health impacts.
Yes.
These health impacts just from one exposure to very moldy corn, or, chronic exposure over maybe many years of handling grain, basically.
Right, and one thing that we do need to talk about is the most common lung disease is farmer's lung, and that generally happens from a one-time exposure. And moldy grain is our number one way that people can get farmer's lung, and that is very debilitating. There's other short-term diseases or illnesses that really act the same, where we have fever, cough, shortness of breath, wheezing, flu-like symptoms. We just don't feel well. And that's different than the long-term farmer's lung that if we look around our neighborhoods or maybe within our family members, we know, oh, that person really struggles with shortness of breath. That's probably due to some farmer's lung. So we need to really protect our lungs.
Okay, so what's the million-dollar question, but how can farmers protect their lungs and their respiratory system?
Sure. Well, we first need to understand the hazard. What is it that we're going to be exposing ourselves to? And we've listed things, that of course will be the hazards this time of year with our moldy grain, just grain dust in general, and like you said, the derecho, and there's some other types of hazards that happen with that, because we have some flooding in some areas, we're cleaning up areas. So the number one thing is understand the hazard and understand how that hazard can impact your lungs. And then what can we do? Well, engineering controls is one thing. You know, try to mitigate, try to stay out of the area, try to clean things up. But generally with farming, we are pushed into the area where we need to wear personal protective equipment. And we've got some great pictures here to show different types of respirators. So we can choose a respirator based on what our hazard is.
Okay, so how do we know, looking at a mask, if it's
Sure.
appropriate for what we're dealing with?
What we're dealing with. So first of all, we want to make sure it's NIOSH approved. So NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. So an N95, all of the mask respirators that you have here on the screen are NIOSH approved. So that means that someone has done the research to say, if this particular respirator fits you appropriately for the size of your face, and you're able to get some, make sure we have a good seal, then we know that that's going to protect you for the majority of the situations in agriculture. So if I look on the screen, I can say all of these two-strap disposable respirators would be good for grain mold. They'd be good for just a general dusty environment from grains, but they'd also be good in our hog confinement buildings for poultry, hay, because we know they are an N95. They are filtering 95% of our air. As you move into the other pictures that you see with our reusable cartridge respirators, those provide generally a better fit because we get a really good seal, and then we can also put cartridges on. So if we're doing things like disinfecting or applying our pesticides, or maybe we want to have some eye protection, there's an added benefit to actually having a better respirator that fits you better.
Okay, so with COVID going on, we know that there's a lot of places in the state where we cannot get access to some of these disposable N95 masks. They're very hard to come by. So what would be your best alternative to offer?
Sure. Well, the first thing that we're going to say is if you have N95 respirators, do a good job of conserving them. Generally in the past, we've said if they're one-time use, when you're done using them for the day, you get rid of them. Now we're saying you must do what's called conserving. So healthcare workers are doing this as well. So we're going to make sure that when we're done using it for the day, we try to get the excess dust off, and then we make sure it's dried out and there's not moisture left in it, and then we put it in a Ziploc bag. Protect it. Don't just leave it laying around. They're really vitally important, and they're hard to get all over the United States. So conserve what you have, number one.
So maybe don't leave it on the dash of your truck getting dust all day, things like that.
Don't hang it from the rearview mirror, or many times we can go out into our shops and we can see that there's an N95 respirator laying there. It's on the floor of the combine, it's on the floor of our truck. So yes, let's take very good care of them. So that's number one. So conserve what you have. And then also then we can move up a step to the reusable respirator. And this is a great picture of a, reusable respirator with what's called P100 filters. And that provides the same type of protection of what we're used to with our N95s. And these are pretty readily available. And then also consider the fact, we've purchased a respirator that we can now add cartridges to for our pesticides, or perhaps for some of our other jobs that we're doing, such as disinfecting our hog barns. So you've actually moved up a step, and you provided you with some protection for later as well.
Great, yeah. How about some people are selling the N95 masks. What do you think about those? What's the big difference there?
Right. I think this is a confusing time for respirators in general, because we've also been accustomed to talking about the one-strap masks that really are not good for agriculture, the ones that we should be using to clean our garage, or maybe sweep out our shop or something like that, where we don't have some really dangerous types of respiratory hazards. And then we're moving on, we're saying, we have cloth face coverings. Those essentially do not protect you from agricultural hazards as well. Now the KN95s have not been approved with the same process as our N95s. So we have a NIOSH approval system in the United States. That's how we know the research has been done. It's good, sound research. And the KN95s come from another country. but we don't really know how they've been tested, what kind of research they've been through. So they have not been approved. I do know that some people are wearing them, but we know that they've not gone through the approval process in the United States.
Okay, good to know. So what other things are important to think about? Sizing?
Yes.
Fitting to your face? Is that something to think about?
Definitely. We say the right size mask with the right fit for the right job. So the first thing you want to do, like I said, is know what your hazard is and know which of the respirators we're seeing here in front of us would be appropriate for that particular job. And then as you can see, there's different styles, so obviously different shapes. So for smaller faces, we would want the one on it's the one that looks not quite round. It's called the 9211. That fits smaller size faces, such as mine. And then some of the other ones will fit larger size faces. And then when we move into the reusable respirator, the one with the big pink round filters, those should be fit tested. I understand that can be a problem as well. And we do have a video that's part of this section that we're talking about here that talks about fit check. That's something we can do every time we put on any one of these respirators to see if we've got any leaking around our respirator, and that will tell us if indeed we have the wrong size. I know a lot of individuals, safety professionals, and health professionals in the state of Iowa are now learning how to do fit testing, where you have a hood, you spray saccharin in and around or Bitrix so that you do know you have the right fit. If you know you're going to be in an environment where it's more likely to get an illness or disease such as farmer's lung, I would really work hard to try to find someone to make sure you have the right size respirator.
Okay, so there's the fit test, but also making sure you have a good seal every time you put one.
Yes, that's called a fit check. So it's a little bit different process, or it takes somebody else to do the fit testing. And that's also important for some of our EPA, the new changes for our pesticides, which would be another whole conversation, but some of those also require fit testing.
Okay. Okay, well, that kind of covers a lot of my questions. Do you have anything else to add that maybe we skipped over or anything?
I think that people should work hard to make sure you're protecting your respiratory system. Sometimes it's that extra step that maybe you don't feel like you have time to do, or it becomes frustrating because you can't find what you want, or just you're in a hurry. This is a busy time of year. So if we can gather up our stuff, gather up our respirators, make sure we know what we have, maybe assign that to somebody else in your family to look on Amazon or look on different places where different farm supply stores. Let's get those things in hand that we need, and so that we're well prepared when we actually need a respirator, and keep them with you. Find sometimes like coolers or something like that, someplace you can keep your things stored, keep them clean and dry so that they're readily available so that we can protect our lungs.
Great, yeah. I know that for my family, just purchased, I was able to find 3 of the N95. I think it was 8233. But
oh yeah, those are great. Very good.
I was able to find at least 3 of those. So I ordered those, and hopefully those will be here pretty soon. But yeah, it's just dedicate someone on the operation. Think about that.
That's right, because when we're very busy, it's hard to, and then we don't want to run back and get them someplace else or look for them when we absolutely need them. And certainly reach out either to Ag Health and Safety Alliance or somebody else, your safety professionals, and get their input too, and get some help to get the things that you can't find.
Definitely, yeah. I guess I just want to highlight one important resource would be the Ag Health and Safety Alliance website. So aghealthandsafety.com, and you have a good resources page. So a couple of the big ones that I see that are really useful this year, you have a handout on respiratory protection during the COVID pandemic, specific for the agricultural community. So maybe some of those tips you talked about on reusing disposables, how to store them and things like that. You have a good video on the respirator, user seal check, just testing for yourself to make sure there's no leaks.
That's right.
And then also a respirator worksheet, I think, is pretty useful. It kind of lists out some of the uses for some of the different.
Yes, it can get a little complicated, and this is meant to just be printed on your printer and write on it to make notes. And we basically use it as a handout, like you said, a worksheet, and it really takes you through all the different hazards in agriculture. And it reminds us that some hazards are immediately dangerous to life and health, such as hydrogen sulfide or oxygen limiting areas, which of course, general respirator use is not appropriate. But yeah, all three of these resources would be helpful.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Carolyn. I think this is a really important topic, and you have a lot of knowledge on this topic. So it's really great to have you on to talk about this. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much for including me on this important topic, and for not only in the harvest time, but all times of year.
Yes, definitely. Okay.